It gets our audio, and then I'm going to go
That's
ahead and start. Okay, awesome. Just going to pull this up, and I'm going to make sure that when I look at it on my phone, it is showing something. It is. That's wonderful. Um,
sweet.
so yeah, we can go ahead and get started, and people will come on as they can, as they have time, or watch it later. I figured I'd get started with an introduction of Matt. For those of you who have not seen him on Facebook, he is an arborist, and he is a very good arborist, I would say, and knows a lot more about trees than I do, and knows some interesting things about like fungus and diseases in trees as well. That is way above my pay grade. And he's just a wonderful guy. I enjoy collaborating with him. We've done some presentations together at, I hate to say it, the Lafayette County Master Gardeners, Ole Miss. Man, it pains me. The Eco Club, I guess you could say, on MSU's campus, Students for a Sustainable Campus, they have a T-shirt that says "Save the Planet, except for Oxford." Um, so that's kind of where I stand on that. But we've also gotten to do some landscape work together, and that's been really fun. So yeah, I'd love to just hear an introduction about yourself, what got you into native plants, and then we'll see how the conversation unfolds.
Thanks, Nate. Well, thanks for having me on and for the very thrilling and overdone presentation of in an introduction. So, yeah, Matt Nielson. I own a company in Oxford called Green Groves. Beyond just my company, I'm a passionate lover of native plants, native trees. I have a degree in horticulture from Auburn University. Horticulture, the study of plants, especially as it interfaces with people, and particularly the ornamental use of plants. And my education doesn't exactly match up or line up exactly with where I am now. A lot of my pursuit is beyond just the ornamental aspects of plants and what function do they provide to the ecosystem, what function do they ultimately provide to humans beyond just the aesthetic. So I went to Auburn, graduated, worked at a fantastic company called Select Trees in Athens, Georgia. We grew a lot of great native trees, also some that weren't native that now I look back in my history and think, man, I wish I wouldn't have sold that many of XYZ. But the more you know, the better you do. The more you learn, the more you look at your impact and the legacy that you're leaving with what you plant and what you advise folks to do with their home landscape, with their corporate landscape, with their university, with the city. So I have lots of different clients, and I guess those 12 years of selling trees really prepared me to collaborate with landscape architects, contractors, owners, managers of landscapes, and to think about the impact that we're having, in our own backyard. Even in Oxford, Mississippi, I am an Auburn Tiger. Then I moved to Athens, Georgia, so I learned how to bark like a dog. And then I moved here and realized there's a whole nother set of bulldogs. And I don't know how to bark like them, but I do say, hotty toddy whenever I can. My wife's a professor at Ole Miss in the accounting school. So I think a lot about data. And Nate has been super gracious to introduce me to the data component of native landscapes, using things like iNaturalist, Bonap, looking at these resources that have collected a massive amount of data over the years to help inform our decision making as to what trees we plant, what we plant underneath our trees, and what those different ecosystems can look like. So, yeah, Nate and I was looking back, Nate, and I don't know if you're able to share my presentation. That might add another technical component, but I'm glad to give
You can
everybody
go
a
through
good
there. That
background.
shouldn't be a problem.
You want me to just click share?
Yeah.
All right, I just sent you a request on that. So Nate and I first started collaborating about 3.5, 4 years ago on a project and in Columbus, the Golden Triangle. And then in October of 2022, we presented to the Lafayette County Master Gardeners here in the Oxford area. And then in October 2023, we talked to them about what has happened with cold damage. And I maybe did that presentation. I can't remember which ones Nate's been on, but October 2022 is kind of when we first started that collaboration. So it's hard to believe it's almost been 2.5 years, almost 3 years. So yeah, I continue my passion for native plants. And I think the more that I've learned, the more I've realized the importance of our native trees and how many options there are available to us and how important it is to select the right species, get good genetics, and plant it correctly. The devil's in the details. So the way that it gets planted, the way that it gets cared for determines its lifespan. And it's all a lot of fun to me. So I had my business here in Oxford for about 5 years and enjoying the ride. I do a lot of home consults, looking at how to mitigate risk on large trees, and then also where new trees should be planted, what species they might be, what can we find in the trade, how does a contractor plant it, or how does a homeowner attain a tree and then plant that. So staying very busy, and have had the fortunate opportunities to work with Nate and another guy named John Keys, who Nate introduced me to. Just super fortunate and grateful to have met him. Working on some land management plans. How do we treat medium-size acreages, so like in the 5 to 50 acre range, which a lot of people own. They don't have thousands of acres, but they've got enough. And they're wondering, how do I take care of this? How do I steward it well in order to be able to accomplish my objectives, whether that's wildlife or aesthetics or stormwater mitigation for runoff. A lot of it has to end up boiling down to wildlife and aesthetics. So that's a long enough introduction about me, Nate. Tell me what's on your mind.
There's a lot of different ways we could go with that. I'm excited to see your presentation, which you should be able to hit share on now. I gave you permission to do that. Um,
Great.
but one thing before you get into that, I just wanted to ask. So you talk about a lot of these intersections between people and the environment and trees and ornamental qualities of plants. And maybe you
Yep.
could help that become more concrete in the minds of our viewers by giving a anonymized, just a story of a time that something that related to trees has hit those things. It's hit the ecosystem, it's hit personal health, safety goals, and it's also hit ornamental side of things.
Yeah, great question. Much to your chagrin, I think one easy place to point out would be the University of Mississippi campus, Ole Miss. Um, so Ole Miss is one of my clients. I'm super grateful to be able to work with them and their landscape services staff. I think that's a great opportunity to explore the juxtaposition and the interfaces between all those different users and the different objectives. So Ole Miss, home of the Grove. If we just take the Grove, for example, we've got a lot of native trees, a lot of trees that are native to the county, native to the state, native to the greater Southeast that maybe don't occur in the county proper, but have been planted by the landscape services staff or their contractors over the years. We have a tremendous amount of compaction due to those game days and thousands of people who want to come to the Grove. Even the Mississippi State fans, I think, appreciate the Grove. So we've got a lot of people, a lot of foot traffic, a lot of compaction. Up until the 80s, people could drive into the Grove. So we had a lot of compaction from that, a lot of root damage. But we've got these big old trees, and we're trying to keep them alive as long as we can to provide the shade, to provide oxygen, to provide the cooling effect. Each little tree, and the big trees especially, are like air conditioners. With that evapotranspiration happening, we've got the cooling effect. If you've ever noticed the difference between the cooling effect of a tree and just building shade, it's a little different world. So you got these vaulted trees creating this amazing canopy. And so we're getting a lot of people interaction with trees. We're trying to mitigate risk. So through pruning, through management of the soil, increasing soil airspace, the pores, micro and macro pores in the soil, in order to facilitate the growth of the grass underneath, which they're very big on grass. It's a lot of non-native grasses, but it's an interesting managed space. And at least we've got the native trees with some soft landings. So we kind of, it's an interesting space where you've got a lot of people You got a lot of trees, a lot of big trees, and we're trying to reduce the likelihood of limb failures, complete tree failures. So I don't know if that hits on some of your points or your question, but to me, that's kind of the case study, because I don't know of any other place in the Southeast, maybe even the US, that gets that amount of foot traffic, that amount of compaction, where we're trying to grow really big trees. And we've got around 153 or so, I think, in the grove right now. So it's an interesting place. Lots of southern red oak, scarlet oak, black oak, white oak, overcup oak, black black gum, tulip poplar, saucer magnolia, non-native, but well-loved by lots of folks. Shoot, there's probably a bunch more that I'm forgetting. American elm. It's a cacophony. It's a cornucopia of native trees. So it's a fun place to be. Are you able to see my
It's really
presentation, Nate?
impressive.
Are you able to see the screen share?
Yes, and everyone's able to see the screen share.
Right.
And I'll just take a moment to say, if anyone has questions who's watching this, feel free to drop them in the live chat. We'll try to get to them, and feel free to drop any comments after the video has aired, and we'll try to get to them as well.
Awesome. Yeah, so I thought one cool thing to talk about is some of the new things in arboriculture. You know, what are impacting the way that we manage trees, especially our native trees. One of those I've already touched on is tree risk assessment. How do you mitigate risk? You know, we want big shade trees, but a lot of folks are concerned about that tree falling on their house, or a big limb dropping on the playground in their backyard, or they've got their car parked in the driveway and a limb fell down in a storm and they want to know, why did that happen? So ISA, International Society of Arboriculture, spends a lot of time talking about tree risk assessment and developed a qualification for that for arborists to pursue. I did that about 4 years ago, and it really shifted my paradigm on how I look at trees, how I assess risk, and what recommendations I give to clients on how to mitigate it. So how do we take a tree that maybe has a high risk rating and bring that down to a moderate or low risk rating so that a tree owner, can tolerate it? That's what tree risk assessment really deals with. And then prescription pruning qualification from the great Dr. Ed Gilman out of the University of Florida. If you've never been to Dr. Gilman's website, Nate and I have talked about it in presentations before. It is the creme de la creme for free instruction on how trees should work. Nate, maybe we could put that in the show notes later. Yeah. But there's a link. He's got his entire arboriculture, his tree class from the University of Florida before he retired about 2 years ago, posted there, and you can watch it in 5 to 10 minute video increments. And it is fantastic. Grouped by different subject matters, talking about what's the difference between a removal cut and a reduction cut and a heading cut, and how do we train structure in trees so that they're more storm resilient. Gilman wrote the literal book, The Illustrated Guide to Pruning for Trees, and you may not want to spend all of your life perusing that 170 plus page book, but his videos do a really great job of breaking it down and bringing that visual aspect to it. So Gilman rolled out the prescription pruning qualification out of the Florida chapter of ISA. I just went through the class about 2 months ago in Memphis. It is incredible. Instead of saying, hey, let's go trim our trees, or hey, let's go prune up our trees, the pruning prescription allows you to specify your objectives, the conditions of concern that you have about a tree, and be able to prune to meet particular objectives. So it's two great advances in arboriculture over the last 20 plus years that a lot of folks just don't know about, but they're out there, they're available, and there are practicing arborists in the state of Mississippi and throughout the U.S. that are implementing the recommendations that have come from these qualifications. So thought I'd throw that out there to you as some additional information. This is Gilman himself. And anybody guess what this tree is? It's a lacebark elm, not native, on a lot of nurseries planting list, on several states' invasive species lists. So it's interesting to see how the nursery industry responds. And the nursery industry responds to the specifiers and to clients. You are a client if you're watching this, if you've ever planted a tree or want to. So what you demand from nurseries is ultimately what they'll grow or what they'll pursue to grow. So the nursery industry responds to client requests. Nate, I love to talk. As you know, I have the gift of gab. So stop me here and ask me where you want this to go and what should we talk about?
It's a great question. Let's see, is there any questions in the chat? Not yet. So I would say just use your gift and shower us with knowledge until I or someone in the chat has a question.
All right. So that's a lot of free reign, and I don't do well. To whom much is given, much responsibility is demanded. So let me try to rein it in. I think if you can see this picture, this is a bald cypress in North Carolina. Just an absolutely fantastic tree, and I'll let you into the secret on my show notes here, speaker notes. This is in Black River, and this tree is 2,600 years old, ballpark, based on some dating. Bald cypress is a native tree to the southeast. Yes, it grows in wet areas, bottomland areas, even in this, in a riverbank. For Mississippi, we're probably still not planting it enough, even in urban areas. We're so scared of knees and litter and all the things that trees bring to the table that sometimes we get put off. Certainly, siting the tree in the right location is smart. It's got to have a lot of soil volume. But this is a tree that can live to outlast your great grandkids. And we're thinking too short term, I think, oftentimes, in terms of our trees and what they're capable of doing. This is a tulip poplar, Liriodendron tulipifera, one of my favorite scientific names. This is in Maryland, but why don't we have big trees like this in Mississippi? Do you see big trees like this in Mississippi? A lot of times not around developed areas, sometimes due to poor pruning practices, compaction, a lack of understanding of how roots grow. But this tree is 140 foot tall, tulip poplar, one of our tallest growing native trees. And then this is a little closer to home. This is in Ocean Springs, live oak. See these super low spider-like branches that droop down to the ground, providing additional stability. The lower the center of gravity for a tree, the stronger or the less likely it is to fail in storm events. So we get really used to limbing trees up, which sometimes we need to do for clearance. But I think there's a place for letting some trees, maybe even in our front yard, grow with some lower limbs. And this would be a fun one to climb if you were a kid. I'd still hop up there, and I'm 42. So big trees that droop down to the ground are a lot of fun. This is on Southern Miss's campus, the Friendship Oak, dating back to 1487 by most accounts. So, this tree, again, real low limbs, real stable. Live oak, rarely do you see fail in storms when they're this type of a structure. They can withstand hurricane winds, Cat 3, Cat 4 winds and not blow over. This tree's seen some serious storms over its lifetime. And then this is another one. This is at Alcorn State with one of my buddies who is a tree guru from Auburn University, the arborist there. His name is Alex Hedgepath. I've learned a lot from him, especially about native trees. This is cherry bark oak, formerly Quercus falcata pagodafolia, and now I think just Quercus pagodafolia. A fantastic tree. We should probably be planting it more. It's a native to bottomland areas, primarily riverbanks, alluvial plains, those types of areas where you get low soil oxygen. Consequently, it does real well in urban environments where you get a lot of soil compaction, low soil oxygen. This is 72 inches DBH. So that's diameter at breast height, 4.5 feet above the ground. Bald cypress, Nate, you'll know these. This is Sky Lake WMA near Belzoni, which I say all Mississippi cities wrong, Nate, so you'll have to correct me since you know more about pronunciation in these parts, since I'm from Georgia and moved here 6 years ago. I'm still trying to get with the program. But this is bald cypress. Absolutely spectacular, a tree that we should be planting more, especially when we've got big areas and low areas, or real urban areas where a lot of our other trees may not do well. This tree can thrive. This is Northern Catalpa on the Ole Miss campus on fire. It survived a lightning strike 2 years ago. I got the fortunate privilege of putting out the fire after the fire department tried to put it out with about 750 gallons of water. We took a hose and found the nooks and crannies because this tree's probably been struck by lightning more than once. Dated to around the time of Ole Miss starting point. So I coughed, Nate, because I didn't want to say the name. All right, so this is just bringing it home. This is at my house, and this is Austria, Virginiana. You get a couple of different common names for this one. Nate, what's your favorite common name for Austria?
Just go with Eastern hop hornbeam. Is that the
Eastern
correct
hop
common name?
hornbeam. Yep. So you hear it called a lot of different things, but this tree was about, I don't know if you can see my cursor, Nate.
Mm-hmm. I can.
It was about that tall when I planted it 4 years ago. And this tree has absolutely skyrocketed with some water. I water this area often. We've got some woodland phlox planted underneath here, and I've also got a couple of other plants that Nate has recommended to me over the years, a couple of sedges under there. And so just getting them established, I watered it a lot. Got some Christmas fern over here in the right corner. And this tree has absolutely taken off, and I've used it as a pruning example of what you can do to train a young tree. You see the limbs are low. So I'm wanting to keep the limbs short. I'm abridging them constantly instead of limbing them up too fast, which creates a floppy top. And a floppy top wants to fall over. It's more prone to breaking from storing damage. So we're keeping the low limbs on, building diameter and strength of the trunk. Something that you can do at home with a young tree. And you hear a lot, well, if you plant the young tree, it'll take over the old tree, or it'll take over a tree that you planted at a larger size. So you plant a 3-foot tall tree and a 12-foot tall tree, this one's going to catch up, right? And I think there is some truth to that, especially from conventional nurseries that don't do anything to manipulate the roots when they're early in their life. And this is kind of an example of how much growth you can get from one of our native trees in a very short period of time. So it's about 20 feet from the house, 15 feet from the house. So enough space where it can grow over time. So Nate, interject here and keep me on track and make sure we're hitting on the things that you've got on your agenda.
You hear a cat toy rolling around in the background. That is our cat.
I love it. So a couple of other things to point out here. Big shade trees as an alternative to lacebark elm, American elm, and cedar elm. This is the native range of cedar elm. So you can see it's not native to my county. It's not too far away. I think cedar elm is one of those drought tolerant trees we're probably not using enough or keeping around enough. Chinkapin oak. This is American elm. This is Jefferson American elm, the parent tree, which is available in the trade. This is Princeton American elm, available in the trade. Need a lot of pruning when they're young. Get a good arborist to help you, or check out Dr. Gilman's website, and he can show you how to prune when they're young. This is an American elm growing in absolutely awful conditions in Oxford, across from the church that I attend. Look at that native range in American elm, according to Bonap. I mean, just an absolutely adaptable tree to a lot of different conditions. So one of my favorites, and Dutch elm disease knocked out a lot of American elms, but then we have the genetically resistant. They're not necessarily immune, but they show a lot of resistance to American elm diseases. And Jefferson, Princeton, Valley Forge are several of those. This is from a presentation Nate and I did. This is Leland cypress. Still seeing a lot of Leland cypress planted. It's a bummer of a tree. It will leave you sad if you continue to plant it. Susceptible to a lot of diseases, does not like poor drainage. We've got Eastern red cedar. If you need a screening tree, it is a no-brainer for most conditions, especially in Mississippi. Look at the native range on Eastern red cedar. An invader in other states into natural areas and can be problematic. In Mississippi, you see less of that, especially in a home landscape. Probably less of a big deal to plant Eastern red cedar. And then American holly, significantly overlooked, and the Ilex extenuata cultivars like Foster, Savannah, and there's another one, Hume, number 2, all good choices. So Nate, one of the things you put in the Facebook invite, I think, was how do we use our native perennials, grasses, sedges, forbs under big trees. You and I have talked about this before. Hard to beat a plug for planting, spaced very tight. So you could plant on like 8-inch, 10-inch, 12-inch centers, depending on your objectives, the species. But these are what we're talking about when we're talking about plugs. There's 50 of these in a tray of plants. That's probably the smallest plug that you can find out there in most cases, maybe some 72 flat cell sizes. And then you can go all the way down to like a 32, and you can get a lot of plant that's pretty small, but establishes really quick. And this is a pretty good photo to show the difference between like the classic gallon or quart that you're buying in a nursery and the benefits of using a small plant. What are the benefits? One of them is cost. It's less expensive. Another benefit is, let's say you're planting under a big mature oak that you really want to keep. If you're planting gallon plants, you're going to do a lot of root damage to try to dig and get that plant in the ground. A plug, you can use a trowel, you could use a drill with an auger on it, and drill small holes and plant these with very little damage to the big tree that's providing this ecosystem that's going to facilitate the growth of the plants underneath it, right? So especially when you're planting shade-loving plants underneath a big tree, plugs are, I think, advantageous. This is one of the projects Nate was talking about that we worked on together. It's in Columbus. This is wine cups, which I learned that one from Nate. I didn't know that plant. Do I have that right, Nate?
Is native Louisiana westward, but there are native ones in Mississippi. We've got Calleri papaver, and I'm not saying the scientific name right. It's spelled weird. Calli uh, Rhoe, something like that.
I think that's right.
But
Yep.
anyway, we have papaver and we have triangularis. But those are mostly in South Mississippi, but they do fine up in North Mississippi. A very good wintergreen plant that has a decent blooms period, low to the ground, almost all that you could want in a plant.
Yeah, this one the client has fallen in love with. It's one of their favorites. Getting text messages from the client. And these are the trays. These are all plug trays before we started planting, just to give you an idea of how many plants you can get for a minimal amount of dollars. And then this is another planting that was done underneath some big trees. Most of these were grown from plugs. This is at Strawberry Plains Audubon Center in Holly Springs, Mississippi. Great place to visit to see plants. So you may be saying, where can we buy? Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I think we should let viewers know kind of what what they should expect buying plugs. What's the cost per plant?
Yeah, so if you buy from a place like Izzle Native Plants, which is basically a broker or a retailer of wholesale plug sources, they're going to mark up those plugs that you would buy wholesale. But for the average homeowner, this is a great way to purchase plants, is through Izzle. And I think most of their plugs are going to come in between like $3 and $5 per plug. So substantially less on a retail front than what you would get, with a 1 gallon or a quart size. Camp Creek, I think, would probably do some plugs on projects where I'm working. I'm buying plugs wholesale, but Izzle is going to be marking those up to, cover their costs and to make a profit to stay in business. So I think that's a great website to check out. I like their business model. I think it makes sense. I think it brings, you don't want 50 of one thing. Izzle allows some mix and matching on some species, as I understand it. I've never ordered from them, but that's a good opportunity to purchase plug-sized plants from a trusted source.
Yeah.
So, does that answer your question, Nate, or what do you have to add to that?
Yeah, that does. Yeah, I would just add, this is definitely a good option for people who don't have the ability to order wholesale. Wholesale nurseries tend to only ship to licensed horticulturists or nursery owners or something like that. They can be restrictive, and they also have high minimum orders usually. Isle does get its plants mostly from the Midwest and Northeast regions. So if you're talking about, are they going to, even if the plants are native to Mississippi, they may perform more poorly in our hot, humid summers than if you had grown it yourself. But in terms of large scale projects, hard to beat. but I am going to try to beat them actually. So I've got this
Beat it. Yes, I
soft
love it.
announcement. We got about 10 minutes left, it looks like, but I've got
Okay.
a soft announcement to make, which is that I am working on a plant propagation network for Mississippi. Mississippi State Extension is already doing this specifically for Gulf coastal restoration. They've got their own program that's great. You should definitely check that out, especially if you're interested in growing brushes and some other coastal plants. They are going to be expanding that, but they got their funding cut and some other issues. But what I'm going to try to do is just make a network of people who want to start growing plants and plugs so that they can grow local plants in Mississippi and then get connected with local nurseries and landscapers so that we can start sourcing our plants from Mississippi grown plants. Um, so that's the vision. We are very many steps away from that, but working in that direction.
Fantastic, Nate. That's
We do,
great.
we do also have a question in the chat. Someone asked, I'm starting a pollinator garden. What are some small native trees that would also be pollinator plants? I'm in central Mississippi.
Yeah, great question. So a couple that I got turned on to by both Nate and John Keys. One of them would be something like one of our native plums. And Nate, you're probably going to be able to answer these questions better than I can related to pollinators. But American plum, I'm sorry, the Chickasaw plum and a number of other plums would have traditionally been in a lot of areas where you now see things like privet, wisteria, a lot of our big invasives, mimosa, these plants that grow along hedgerows or grow along forest edges that want some sun, but don't get real big. And, some of our native plums, I think, could be a good choice. I don't know everything to know about their pollinator, what they bring to the pollinator table. Nate, can
They're
you
very
answer that?
pollinator plants.
So that would be one potential option. Again, Nate, you're going to be able to speak more about this, but this is Amelanchier. This is a cultivar called Autumn Brilliance, which is a cross between, I can't remember which two Amelanchier species, but most people know it as serviceberry. You don't see this one very often in people's yards, but it is a great tree. It does get fire blight, but there's a lot of things that get fire blight. And so there's a couple of things you can do to minimize the likelihood of fire blight. But I love Amelanchier. I think it's underused. Nate, pollinator status on that one?
I've not looked into that very much, but I believe it is good. Most of those plants that are in the rose family are good pollinator plants. Some other ones
Good
I would
point.
like to add on are buttonbush. It is the butterfly attractor in terms of a tree or shrub in the state. You can prune it into tree form, or you can grow it in a shrub form. And then also smooth sumac, great plant. It's got the best fall color in Mississippi. Bumblebees love the flowers. And then we have, I would say after that, probably the Buckeyes. Red Buckeye, especially, seems to be a big favorite for hummingbirds, but also for butterflies, bees. Lots of things will visit that.
Yeah, a couple more to throw out there that you reminded me of, Nate. Bottlebrush Buckeye is another one that's not classically necessarily native to northern Mississippi where I am, but we plant it and it does really well, and it is native to the southeast. And man, in late June when it flowers, it is covered in butterflies. It is a reserved grower, and I've got mine pruned up into these really great tree form plants. And then there was another one that I was thinking, oh, Tinianthus virginicus, our native fringe tree. People call it Grancy Graybeard, Old Man's Beard. It's one of those that's got like 6 common names, depending on who you talk to. But that I have seen some pollinators on. I don't know what its pollinator attraction status is, but it is a relatively good, smaller tree, slower growing. There's one in front, if you're ever in Oxford, there's one in front of the Oxford Library that's absolutely spectacular. And when it's in bloom, it is show-stopping. So from an aesthetic value, from wildlife value, it seems to have some good, and it also produces like a blueberry or like a kind of a drupe, I guess. And it is seemingly consumed by wildlife. I rarely see them hanging on the tree that long. So I think something is eating them.
Should give a starting point for pollinator-friendly trees. So we have about 5 minutes before Zoom decides to boot us off the platform. So do you have any closing thoughts and things in your presentation you wanted to make sure to hit?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, as you can probably tell, I can talk for a long time about trees. Um, I think the way that we care for trees indicates our perspective. If you're listening to this, you probably have some interest in native plants. And there's a lot of things, there's a lot of malpractice that happens from tree care companies that are either maybe well-intentioned but not educated, or they are more interested in removing trees than retaining old trees and looking at the other benefits that a big tree can provide beyond just the aesthetic. There are many ways to mitigate risk on trees that are old. If you go to Europe, you can see trees that are 500 years old and they're more commonplace because they understand how to prune them. And so I think we in the Southeastern United States have an opportunity to educate ourselves, educate others on the benefit of big old trees that are tough to replace, how we can retain them, how we can care for them. So I guess my pitch is somewhat self-serving, although I'm not the only arborist in the state. There's several of us out there, and a lot of them are qualified to give good advice. You can go to treesaregood.org and search by your zip code in a certain mile radius of your zip code, and find arborists that could help you with pruning prescriptions, tree risk assessment. And usually it's a pretty low dollar amount to have somebody come out and advise you before you have the tree company come out to just cut limbs off. So I think there's an opportunity for improving the retention of our old veteran trees, keeping them around longer. They provide a ton of benefits to wildlife, and you just can't replace a 100-year-old oak tree. So I guess this is my pitch for the arborist community, Nate, to get in touch with somebody who really knows tree care and how to prune, how to take care of the roots, and all the different options that are out there to do it well.
So, and I will go ahead and ask a question that might also be self-serving for yourself. So what would you say is the least harmful way to plant under trees? You've got your plugs. Now you got the choice between a shovel and what else, and what's the best way to do it?
Yeah, I mean, so we bought an air spade about 5 years ago and started experimenting with an air spade. And an air spade is, if you think of a pressure washer on steroids, supercharged pressure washer, but instead of water, you're using air. So we shoot the air out of this long tube with a rifled tip. It comes out at Mach 2, twice the speed of sound, and you can excavate around a tree without damaging most roots. It's pretty easy to dig up the soil and then to plant in those spaces. The downside is you do bring a lot of other seeds to the surface. So it's like cultivating, it's like tilling with a rototiller in a garden, but we're just doing it in a way that doesn't harm roots. So there's pros and cons to that. You may get a lot of weed seed brought to the surface, but it is one way to cultivate an area under a tree in order to be able to plant plugs. We can also vertical mulch, and you could plant in the vertical mulch holes and not disrupt as much soil. So yeah, I don't know if that's where you were going with the question, but the air spade is a cool tool. There's not many people that have them. I own three, just due to demand and my belief in the way that it operates. But there are a couple of others in the state that offer them, and even a homeowner could purchase one and use it with a high speed compressor. I've trained several homeowners on how to do it for tree care and because they wanted to plant underneath some big trees and minimize root damage.
That's awesome.
So maybe the air spade.
Yeah. So if you are in Northeast Mississippi, is that kind of your range?
Yeah, I go Memphis, into the Delta, down to Jackson, over to Birmingham, and with my main focus in northern Mississippi.
Yeah. So if you have some big trees that you're worried about falling, or if you want to plant soft landings under a tree without harming the tree, or if you just want someone to come out and you can brag about your cool trees to him, he will definitely appreciate that. So feel free to reach out to him. I'll put his contact information down below. I'll put those links that were referenced earlier down below. And I think that's all that we have time for. Uh,